Hello everyone, this is Bentley, and today we're going to go over a couple of quick tips on how to be successful with rainbow fish. As you all know, I'm a huge fan of rainbow fish. I've kept a number of species in my time in aquatics, and I have quite a few in my home. So whether you're a first-time rainbow fish keeper setting up your very first tank, or maybe you've caught the bug like I have and you like to keep kind of as many as you can, let's talk about some tips to have success with rainbow fish for the long term. Now, a preface on this is not about breeding rainbow fish. That's a very different subject. This is just about how to keep them thriving, healthy, see good behavior, and have great color. My first tip for you is very simple. Rainbow fish and temperature matter. And this doesn't mean that they have to be kept super hot or only a specific temperature, but like a lot of fish, rainbow fish fall into a very typical tropical range, and I would argue that about 74 degrees Fahrenheit or so is kind of optimal temperature-wise. If you can get anywhere in that 74 to 76 range, you're doing great. Don't go much above 80 degrees, because once you start getting into those higher temperatures, you risk a little bit of bacterial infections, and more importantly, you're going to shorten the lives of your rainbows. The big rainbows, Melanitania, Glossolepis, and Chalatherina, all can live fairly long lives, usually at least 5 years, with some very rare exceptions, and many of the bigger species can go as much as 10 or 12 years if you take really good care of them. So with that being said, keep a good monitor on your temperature, and that's going to be one of your first very important keys to success. Next, after we've got our temperature set up, we then want to look at water quality and a little bit of mineral content. Rainbow fish come from very, very pristine water systems. Now, some of them come from black water systems, but for the most part, if they do, they tend to have really good levels of oxygenation. So what we want to do is make sure that we're keeping our water quality really good. I would avoid trying to go long terms without doing some form of filter maintenance or water change unless you have a very well planted tank like this one behind me. Rainbow fish and plants are a magic combo. They help keep that water quality up for you, and they act as a great thing to help your rainbow fish settle in and show that color off. So, water quality is number one, and part of that is mineral content. You don't necessarily have to have super hard water, but a lot of rainbows come from either Australia or Papua New Guinea, where there is a good amount of mineral content in their water. So try not to go super soft. It's okay if you have something like 4 degrees of general hardness and a little bit of hardness to hold your pH. Try to have something like roughly 140 to 160 TDS as your low bar. There are very few rainbow fish that are in super soft water. And I know if a few of the super rainbow heads out there would immediately be down in the comments like, lighten me up. But as a general rule, a majority of the rainbow fish you're going to find at your local fish store, and even from some hobbyists who do breeding and sell their fish online, most of them do well with a little bit of mineral content in the water. That just helps them grow really well. Plus, you tend to, in young fish, see more of those curved spine issues if you don't have a little bit of calcium in the water and in their diet. That brings me to our next tip, diet. Rainbow fish, while they are smaller mouth and relatively peaceful fish, they eat a good amount of protein naturally. So we want to make sure they have a good amount of protein in their diet. Now, we're not talking like a heavy carnivore. However, what I would suggest is a good food that is at least 45% protein. You might even try to get something more like 50 or 60%. Or if you're using a prepared food, whether it's a flake or a pellet, my personal favorite for my rainbow fish is doing something like the Extreme Community Crave, because I can mix a little bit of spirulina in with that krill flake. Gives me a little bit of meat, a little bit of veggie. It's a nice mix to help sure that we don't deal with any kind of issues with digestion, where they're maybe bloating up and getting a little compacted in there, so to speak. But more importantly, we're getting them a good amount of protein. The other way that you can do this is by mixing your prepared foods with some nice live or frozen foods, whether it's baby brine shrimp, Daphnia, live or frozen, I personally like feeding frozen cyclops, frozen daphnia, frozen baby brine shrimp as a mixture, and then live baby brine. That's what I kind of mix in. I try to do these at least once a week on top of my prepared foods. And while we're talking about that, fast your fish 1 day a week. When you're super young fish, you don't need to fast them. But when you get to these adults, give them a day off, like every 3 days, then maybe give them a day off. Let them have time to process that food, especially when we're dealing with a lot of flake or pellet food. It helps prevent excess food from building up in their system and leading to constipation issues. So you don't have to treat some stuff in the long term. A little fasting is actually pretty good for your rainbow fish. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but plants and rainbow fish, like this. Match made in heaven. If you want to keep rainbow fish, I heavily suggest a planted tank. Now, you don't necessarily have to go quite as crazy as this thing behind me, where there's almost every inch has some planting in it, and they're like swimming through the bushes, so to speak. But having a good amount of planting in your tank really helps rainbows settle in, be comfortable, and show some of their best color. Plus, you got lots of oranges and yellows and blues and all these colors that really pop with something like a green background. So having in those plants, especially some low maintenance plants to make it easy on you, really does a number in helping your rainbow fish not only thrive, but look amazing. It brings that color out, it really highlights them, and it makes for an absolutely beautiful aquarium in your home. I also mentioned this earlier, but let's talk about water changes. You don't necessarily have to water change a ton, but if you can, especially if you only have 1 or 2 tanks, I would look at trying to do a 50% water change every week. Now, if you're in a area where your water is extremely hard, or maybe you are in parts of California where there's a lot of chloramines instead of chlorine in your water, this might take a little extra effort to help make sure that water is where you want it to be for your fish. But in general, most places and most successful rainbow fish keepers that I know, a 50% water change really perks these guys up, especially if you're trying to encourage spawning behavior. Rainbows really like to show off. When a water change happens, that goes to 11, right? We dial that all the way up. They get excited. They show off. They are feeling great. They love having that clean, fresh water come in. So don't be afraid to do a 50% water change once a week. I would not go more than that. Don't go crazy. We aren't talking like discus where it's like, gotta do a 90% water change every 3 days. No. A 50% once a week is great, or potentially smaller water changes slightly more often. Say maybe something like 20% every 3 days. That's like encouraging a little bit of rainfall, if you will. Think of it like the rainy season. That's always great for your fish. But in rainbows especially, they love having that nice clean water come in. You'll often see wherever you're pouring your water in, they're swimming right into it. They love it. Water changes, they just do the thing for rainbows, man. They're fantastic for their overall health. Keep your tank minimal in the number of species. While rainbows get along no matter what kind of rainbow they are, rainbows definitely do not discriminate. They don't care whether you're a glossolepis, a chalathorina, a melanotania. You don't even have to be the same species. You don't got to be the same genus. They're all going to swim together, get along, have a lot of fun. However, what I have found is the more success I tend to have tends to come from single or only 2 species tanks of rainbow fish. Especially as we get to some of these bigger tanks, you get to have those fish in higher numbers, see way better behavior out of your fish, and overall, you tend to see a little bit better color and a little more natural behavior. When you mix the schools, sure, it's a wall of color and it's beautiful, but if you get one big school in a tank of just a singular species, you're going to see some really incredible behavior, better schooling, and typically a lot better courting. If you can, within those numbers, try to mix it up so there's at least 1 female for every male. And if you can possibly do so, try to have something like 2 males to 3 females, or even 1 male per 2 females if you want to go really extreme. But I would say if you get that like 2 to 3 ratio, or at least 1 to 1, that's going to be best. It's going to prevent the males from over harassing the females, And you're going to see lots of spawning and courting behavior and even little bits of sparring between the boys where they're going to show off all their colors. They're going to do what I like to call battle shipping, where they splay their fins all the way out and they come side by side like this and do this kind of little wiggle with the boys. It is a sight to behold. And the best way to have that happen, all one species, good mix of males and females. My last tip is simple. This comes down to the size of your tank. Unless you are dealing with dwarf rainbow species, rainbows love swim room. So that means long tanks. 4 foot is usually considered the gold standard minimum for most rainbow fish. Now, if you have a rainbow species like the praecox or one of the smaller fish, maccullochi, there's a lot of examples. I'm not going to name them all, but any of the ones that typically get between 3 and 3.5 inches, and you're keeping a smaller group, a 40 breeder is perfectly fine. Something that's a 3-foot tank that's got a good footprint that gives plenty of swim room. But as soon as you start getting to some of the bigger boys, your turquoise, your Chlatharina blaheri, the party animal, any of your Glossolepis species where they get a little bit bigger body, you really want to start looking at 4-foot tanks and bigger. If you can do a big 125 6-footer, man, it's amazing. You have a big group, they have a blast, they show you color, they look amazing. But you can also do something like a 55-gallon with a smaller group, a 75 with a slightly larger group, and so on and so on. As you get that bigger size with more swim room, you can have a few more fish, but keep in mind if you're doing plants at the same time, leave swim room. Make sure the front of the tank at least has a lot of open swim room for those fish. They like to be top and mid-water. The more swim room, the better. You'll see them grow faster, better color, better health, the whole shebang. So make sure your fish have some swim room. Combine it with a good diet, some decent water parameters, a nice water change pretty regularly, and keep that temperature warm, but not too hot, and you're going to have success with rainbow fish long term. That being said, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Hope you enjoyed these tips. If you're a first-time rainbow fish keeper, maybe you just got your first tank or you're looking at doing rainbow fish for the first time, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Or maybe you're a rainbow psycho like me and you have arguably too many species to keep track of. I want to hear from you too. What's the newest one you've got? What's the one that's caught your fancy? What's the very first rainbow fish you fell in love in? Whatever you want to tell me, I want to hear from you guys in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a little like. If you're new to my channel, consider subscribing. I do all sorts of tips, product reviews, a lot of stuff, interviews. I do a lot of fishy related things. Consider subscribing, ring the little notification bell so you don't miss a thing. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.